about to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get away, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's be free with Not looking back, eyes on the freeway, Bonnie and Clyde, a classic cliche. We're on the run, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts.
Okay, good morning. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our what will likely be the first of a series of regular live revision streams. We're going to take a key topic, a topic that maybe hasn't been examined too much before, and look at to do 35 minutes of intense revision, focusing on key application, key evaluation skills, a bit of analysis as well. And as always, those of you watching live, and a number of you are joining us as we speak, please do post your comments, your thoughts, your ideas into the chat window, and we'll give a shout out to some of the best answers as we go through. Before we start, just a quick reminder that we are gearing up, we're preparing for our live events. The View Cinemas, the Sydney Worlds around the country will be full of students covering all kinds of different subjects: economics, business, psychology, sociology, politics and geography across the country, from Bristol to Birmingham, Leeds and London, Manchester and Portsmouth. There were some workshops before Easter and there were some workshops after Easter, and full details can be found at tutor2u.net/workshops. People who sign up to the live event, and they're great fun. I'm looking forward to presenting on lots of them. You also get the free subscription to the online course, which is pretty stunning as well. So that's something to look forward to in late March and early April. Today's focus is on poverty and inequality. Let's start with a quick bubble quiz question. Here we go. Now, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, or three questions. The number of answers that are correct can range from 0 to all 4. So if you get a chance, please put your answers in the chat window. Here's the first question coming up now. Which of these countries have a Gini coefficient higher than 0.5? So the Gini coefficient, one of the key measures of inequality. Anything more than 0.4 is considered high, which of these countries have a Gini coefficient of higher than 0.5? If you can post the letters that you think are correct. So if you think there were 2 right or 3 right, give me the letters. Israel thinks C is correct. Toby thinks B and C are correct. Noah has gone a bit further, and Noah thinks it's A, B, and C, and Charlie thinks it's C. Joe thinks it's A, B, and C, and Alex, A, B, and C. Well, let's take a look at the answer. Correct. Those of you got A, B, C, hats off to you. South Africa, Mozambique, and Angola. 3 obviously sub-Saharan African countries. In fact, South Africa has the highest Gini coefficient in the world, closely followed by Namibia. Mozambique and Angola, those of you studying development economics, really interesting from a development point of view. Very, very high inequality, as well as being low per capita income countries. Brazil is actually 0.49. And of course, they've got a new president, so they may well nudge above 0.5 shortly. Next question coming up. Well done, those of you got the first one right. Let's go to the other extreme. Which of these countries have a Gini coefficient which is less than 0.3? So anything less than 0.3 is regarded as relatively low inequality. What do we think on this one? Our 4 options are Germany, South Korea, Croatia, and Slovenia. Which of these do you think have a Gini coefficient of less than 0.3? Bertie thinks it's A and B. Alex, A. What do we think here? Seastone thinks it's A and B, and Paddy Corbett thinks it's A and D. A couple more. Sean thinks it's A and B. And Bri thinks it's A and B. Here's the answers. In fact, the answers are C and D. Germany and South Korea have Gini coefficients that are lower than the UK, about 0.2, 0.32, 0.33, etc. Croatia and Slovenia have less than 0.3. Croatia, of course, joined the EU in 2013 and just recently joined the single currency. That could be an exam focus this year round. Slovenia has one of the lowest Gini coefficients in the world, relative on a par with Finland and Denmark and Norway. Very, very low level of Gini coefficient in Slovenia. So well done on that. Here's my third bubble quiz question as more people join us. Thank you, by the way, for posting in the live chat. We hugely appreciate it. Which of the following are in the 4 largest sources of tax revenues for the UK government each year? So we think about all the money that comes in from direct and indirect taxes. Which of these appear in the list of the 4 biggest sources of tax revenue? So Rob King has gone for A, C, and D. Ishrat, A and C. Ethan's gone for A. Alex Howard, A, C, D. Quite a few people saying A and C. What do we think? Nado's gone for A and C. Joe, A, C, D. And 1 or 2 people going for just A and C. So here's the correct answer. The answer is A, C, D. Ramenza got the right answer there. So did Alex. Fantastic. Well done. Council tax is the 5th biggest source of tax revenue. Corporation tax is the 4th, brings in about 60 billion a year. Income tax, VAT, and of course, and national insurance, by far the biggest sources of tax revenue. Well, thank you for that. It's a little warm up. We will be shouting out, giving little screen mentions to people as we get into the session, as we go through our session. And our main focus is really 4-fold. Hopefully this is useful for you. Quite a few students I know have their revision notes in front of them and are adding to their notes as we go through the session, which is a great idea. We'll talk a little bit about the scale of income and wealth inequality in the UK. We'll talk about causes of inequality, say something a little bit about how the tax and welfare system redistributes income. And then critically, the main bulk of our session, we're going to take 3 interventions that governments might use to reduce income inequality and get you to evaluate them. So hopefully this will be a really useful session for you. Okay, let's move on. Some facts on income inequality. The Gini coefficient for the UK was 0.36 in 2022. That's the latest data. It won't change before the exam. It was up a tick from 0.35. Interesting, if you take income before tax and benefits, the richest 20%, the top quintile, they had over £107,000 of income, whereas the poorest 20%. The first quintile had only 8,000. There's a 13 times difference. But after taxes and benefits, after the welfare and income tax and tax system has had its effect, that ratio comes down from 13 to 4, 79 to 21, approximately about 4. Somebody was asking me the other day, are there more people receiving benefits than paying taxes? And the answer is yes. In fact, according to the latest data, 52% of people in the UK receive more in welfare than they pay in tax, which sounds quite high. But of course, if you think about the whole population, people who've retired, receiving state benefits, people in full-time education and so on, and the economically inactive, there's 9 million people of working age who are economically inactive. That kind of figure makes a little bit more sense, doesn't it? Okay, so let's focus on the Gini coefficient for the UK. I think the key point here is that most of the rise in inequality is not shown in that chart. The bulk of the increase in inequality happened in the sort of mid to late 1980s. This gives us 30 years of data. So our Gini coefficient carried on rising in the 1990s and into the first half of the last decade. It peaked at 0.38 just before the global financial crisis. Since then, actually, income inequality has been fairly stable in the UK. So it's worth knowing. There hasn't been a significant rise in income inequality in the last 10, 12, 15 years, but it's at a high level. So 0.36 is relatively high for countries with our per capita incomes. So moving on, I think the key aspect here is when we talk about inequality and poverty, poverty is not just about income. I just want to give you this quote from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. Poverty means not being able to heat your home, pay your rent, buy the essentials. It means waking up every day facing insecurity, uncertainty, impossible decisions about money. So poverty is not just about income, it's about consumption, food poverty, fuel poverty, pensioner poverty, working poverty is becoming hugely significant. Bear that in mind, please, when we talk about these issues. Poverty is multidimensional, and so too is inequality. Okay, so moving on. What are the main causes of income inequality? This is a popular exam question, OCR, AQA, EdExcel. They often ask you to examine what causes income inequality. Let's just focus a bit on that now. I'm going to consider 5 main causes. Keep in mind, of course, that income inequality is multi-causal. It's complex. There are short-term dynamics, there are long-term causes. Undoubtedly, the biggest single cause of income inequality is the widening gap in pay between high and well-paid and low-paid jobs. There's no doubt about it. There is an increasing scale and depth of working poverty. Now, working poverty is people who are in work, they have a job, maybe full-time, maybe part-time, but they still claim benefits, in part because the income from their job is not sufficient to lift them out of benefits. It's becoming a major issue. 1 in 8 households in this country are in poverty, and millions of people have a job but are still poor. Partly that's linked to the growth of service sector jobs, low-paid, zero-hour contract jobs in services. In part, it's the long-term decline of manufacturing employment, which used to offer good, solid wages, full-time wages, particularly for men. There's been a fall in trade union membership. Trade union membership in the UK is now less than 25% of all people in work. So fewer than 1 person in 4 is actually a member of a union. And then at the top end of the income scale, we have the bonus culture, prevalent in financial services in particular, which lifts people's earnings at the top, as well as the sharp increase in executive pay, which again is an issue which many exam boards like to test. Executive pay relative to median earnings has surged. Indirect taxes tend to have a regressive effect, widening income inequality. The welfare benefit system, as we'll see in a second, has become less generous, both in real terms and in relative terms to people in work. And then there's the net. If we cast the net wider, the cost of housing and renting, the costs of childcare, the cost of essentials, all of these things contribute to people having less income to spend on other things at the bottom end. My final point on causation is that wealth inequality can contribute to income inequality. If you have savings, so if you have income, you can afford to save. If you save, you earn interest. So the wealth inequality, Well, wealth is often the source of income from rent, from interest, from dividends, from profits and things, and that can widen income inequality. So this slide, I think, tries to give you a feel and a flavour for some of the key causes of income inequality in the UK. And this chart kind of tracks the gap. Many people know there's a big difference in the UK between mean and median. And you need to know for the exam the difference between the two. The mean, of course, is the average. The median is the middle value in the distribution. And you can see that both have gone up. The hourly earnings have gone up. But the gap between mean and median is widening. And the next slide provides a summary of that. Median household disposable income in 2022, and the median income, this is the latest data, was £32,000. This is in real terms. Whereas mean was 39,000. So the gap is now 7,000, and that's the biggest it's been for many, many years. And that is a really useful bit of information on income inequality in the UK. Okay, so moving on. The big issue there is another one we mentioned, executive pay. So last year, FTSE 100 chief executives earned an average of £3.9 million in total remuneration, including bonuses. That was 23% higher than the year before, clearly well above inflation. When it comes to welfare, the UK government has made welfare harder to claim, and they've introduced over the last 10 years or so a welfare benefit cap. That's currently £23,000 a year for lone parents and couples living in London, but £20,000 for people outside London. So you can't claim total welfare benefits more than that. The welfare cap, worth knowing about. Okay, moving on. How does the tax and benefit system change the scale of inequality in the UK? Let me just work you through the key aspects of this. First of all, the income tax. This is the basics that you need to know for the exams. Let me just quickly revise them. So the personal allowance is the income you can earn before tax, and that's £12,570. Now, crucially, that is frozen for the next 5 years. It's called fiscal drag. More people will be paying tax because they'll be earning more than £12,570. But you can earn that before you start paying tax. And obviously, you then get taxed at 20%, 40%, 45% as your income goes up. Interestingly, the government's brought down the level of income at which you start paying 45%. It's now 125,000. It was 150. National insurance, you add on top 13.25%. So those are your direct taxes. And then VAT, which is 20% for most things, 5% for car seats and home energy, and 0 for food, most food in the supermarkets, and things like children's clothes. So there's your key aspects on inequality on the tax system. Moving on, indirect taxes tend to be regressive. Now, if you look at indirect taxes paid as a percentage of income, 23% of the income of the poorest fifth is paid in indirect taxes, whereas only 9% of income is paid by the richest fifth. So indirect taxes are regressive if you express as a share of income. If you express as a share of spending, not quite the same. Well, what are the consequences of this for inequality? Let me just quickly take you through a chart which often appears in exams. So this takes the 5 quintiles. This looks at the bottom quintile, the poorest 20%, second, third, fourth, all the way through to the 5th quintile, the top one, the richest 20%. And this is original income before tax and benefits. So the bottom 20% have only 4% of the income, whereas the richest 20% have 50% of the income. Now, those of you who've done some revision already will know you can use this data to construct something called a Lorenz curve, from which you can construct and calculate the Gini coefficient. Take a look. So that's the blue data. Now take a look what happens after tax and benefits. The share of the bottom 20% goes up from 4 to 7%, and the second quintile from 8 to 12. Third and fourth broadly the same, but the top 20%, their share of income goes down from 51% down to 43%. So again, you can show the Lorenz curve would be closer, wouldn't it, to the line of equality if you were to draw that. And it suggests that our tax and benefit system, broadly speaking, is fairly progressive. But could it be more so? Well, that's a debate. So let's move on now to our key discussion points. And it'd be lovely for you to post some answers and some comments and some ideas in the chat. I'm asking this question: which policies might be effective in bringing down income inequality in the UK? Here are some policies. Some of you might want to take in a second, some of you might want to take a screenshot. There is a big debate between the free market economists who believe in trickle-down economics, that if the economy grows, the size of the pie gets bigger, it can bring down, lift per capita incomes and bring down income inequality. Critics of this view argue this is nonsense, that the empirical data for trickle-down economics is really weak, and actually what you need is pro-poor specific interventions in the labour market, in welfare and tax, etc. So there's a huge debate in economics between the free market versus the interventionist approaches, as I'm sure you know. Now, here are just a range of policies you could use. And actually, I'm going to pick out 3 of them on the next slide. So if we just go to the next slide, I'm going to pick out 3 which we're going to focus on in our last 10 minutes together. But you can do, there's lots of things you can do. You can raise the marginal tax rate on income or wealth. You can increase the minimum wage. You can make welfare more generous in relative terms. You could try and get more people in work, reduce economic inactivity. Governments could offer subsidies for things like energy, university tuition, childcare, etc. Rent controls for housing, tackle discrimination in the labour market, and a radical idea which is gaining traction both in the UK and overseas, perhaps bring in a universal basic income. But together as a group, I thought we'd focus in the time we have together on 3 of these policies: minimum wage, rent controls, and tax rates. So here we go. This is when you can add to the chat. We're going to look at the arguments for and against a significant increase in minimum wage. The minimum wage, of course, is a legal pay floor. All employers must pay to eligible workers per hour. The living wage, a slight ambiguity here, the living wage is a voluntary minimum pay rate that about 7,500 employers in the UK now offer, including quite a few Premiership football clubs. So that's often above the minimum wage. The government says the minimum wage is the living wage. It isn't, but don't worry too much in the exam. Oh, here's the key data, by the way, if you want to have an update. These are the latest figures for the minimum wage, which kick in April 2023. And the minimum wage goes up to £10.42 an hour if you're over the age of 23, £10.18 for 21 to 22-year-olds, and so on and so forth. And the apprenticeship rate goes up to £5.28. So that's quite a significant increase, I think a 9% rise in the minimum wage. Okay, here we go. So we're going to look at, this is we call Give Me 3. We'll press the clock in a second, but can you please give me, write in chat, 3 arguments in favour of raising the minimum wage in the UK. You may not have time to write down 3, so choose one, and we'll pick out some of the answers after 30 seconds. Thank you. Okay, as always, we have a great group in today, and we're going to post some of the great points on the screen. So Ishrat's point there about productivity and work incentives. Joe says more disposable income can be put back into the economy, maybe a positive wealth effect. And if people earn more, they can save more. Alex says improves inequality as 1.9 million people are on the minimum wage. It improves incentives to work and might lead to more people joining the workforce. And John V, a great point about reduces the unemployment trap. Examiners love it, by the way, when you bring in a specific concept. San1789 says that living standards will rise. And Stone C says the increased incentive to work in the short term, but it might lead to a rise in inflation in the long run. We'll come to the evaluation in a second. Thank you for those points. Those are terrific. Those of you joining us live, the quality of points raised in the live chat is amazing. Here were 3 points I did earlier. You can say it improves work incentives and can also increase labour productivity. It might put incentives and productivity together there, the so-called efficiency wage theory, that if you pay people a better wage, they're more productive. It certainly improves the incentive to work. It lifts people out of working poverty. Remember I said before, there's a lot of people in this country who are in working poverty. They have a job, but they don't earn enough, and therefore they have to claim benefits. So if you can increase the earnings of people in work, that means the government will spend less on things like universal credit, income support, housing benefit, and so on. And I think Joe made a great point, and Charlie said increased consumption, there increased growth. There is quite a strong link between the minimum wage and consumer spending, because disposable income will go up, and typically people on relatively low pay tend to have a high propensity to spend. So if you boost your earnings by, let's say, £100 a week or £200 a month, let's say, they might well spend £150 of it, a high propensity to spend. Okay, well, let's evaluate this. Quality of the first points was superb. How about 3 arguments against raising the minimum wage? Have a go. Some lovely points coming through there. Bertie's points about supply shifting left in the short run, unit costs go up, variable costs, yeah. Maybe a disequilibrium in the labour market where there's excess supply of labour. Abbas is talking about real wage unemployment and the risk of a wage price spiral. A couple of people saying it might cause a trade war, but well, unlikely. It might affect exports, though, of course. And higher government spending. Menza says that the government spending might go up, particularly if they have to pay minimum wage, things like the NHS for people working in low-paid work in the NHS and in defence. Excellent points, superb standard. Let's look at my points just as a way of cementing those arguments. So I would argue that potential job losses in labour-intensive sectors. So things like robotics unlikely to really be affected, but there could be lots of jobs in labour-intensive industries where labour demand is more wage elastic. That might prompt some outsourcing of some jobs to other countries. It might cause automation, so supermarkets, fast food automation, security guards replaced by cameras, and so on. There is a risk of cost push inflation as businesses pass on higher costs to consumers. I would add in there the idea of variable costs going up, and you could visualize a cost and revenue curve diagram. And also critically, and notice here the use of such as. So it could be the case that some UK export businesses might become less price competitive. The key there is to use the words such as, I don't know, such as textiles or such as call centers or whatever it is. Okay, so always try and give one example if you can. That's minimum wage. Just very quickly, the analysis side, I'm just going to walk you through the diagram. So here's your classic diagram, isn't it? You're showing a minimum wage. To be effective, you must set the minimum wage above the free market wage. So let's put a minimum wage in there on the next slide. So we add in the minimum wage, which goes up to there. Of course, the impact depends on how high it is. As a result, there was a change in employment. On the next slide, we can see that demand for labour will contract to E2. But on the other hand, on the next slide, the labour supply expands. So this is the point somebody's making about disequilibrium. More people attracted to work at the minimum wage, and therefore, as a result, as the next slide shows, you end up with an excess supply of labour, which the next slide shows is also known as real wage unemployment, or give it another name, classical unemployment, which the next slide labels. And critically, it can lead to a fall in employment and an excess supply of labour. Now, that's a perfectly good diagram. What I would suggest in the exam is you just tweak and change it, develop the diagram in some way. So have a look at that slide and then compare with the next one. What I've done here is I've made the labour demand curve more wage inelastic, suggesting that firms aren't going to lay off lots of workers. And can you see here that the impact on employment is much smaller? And in fact, those people who have a job at E2 getting paid the minimum wage, MW2, will see a significant rise in their earnings. So if we can just go back one slide, if you go back to the original one, that's a normal looking labour demand curve, a lot of jobs lost. Whereas if you make the next slide shows the labour demand curve more inelastic, contrast with that one, If you just change the analysis a little bit, you can get much higher marks. And that really helps the evaluation. The impact of a minimum wage depends on the wage elasticity of demand for labour. Let's try two more. So we've got two more topics to quickly look at. Let's look at rent controls. Monthly median rent in London, just under £800 in England. In London, it's double that. Median rent, £1,600, nearly £1,700, which is 33% of the average monthly household disposable income. It's almost like a tax, 1/3 of the income going on rent, which begs the question, should there be rent controls? Well, these have been suggested. So let's have a look at this question. Can you give me, please, in 30 seconds, 2 arguments in favour of introducing a system of rent controls in the UK? Over to you. Okay, one or two points coming through. Thank you for those. We always appreciate the people who contribute to our chat. It makes such a difference to the quality of our session. So huge thanks for doing that. Charlie Nash says increased disposable income that can be used for consumption. Good point. Yeah, Paddy makes a similar point. Evie says more equality across the UK North and South divide will reduce. I think hinting there at an improvement in geographical mobility. Bertie talks about exploitative prices in poorer areas. Rent takes up a high percentage of poorer income, so a sort of progressive policy there. Some excellent points. Here are my 2 main arguments. So I would argue that a system of rent controls, in theory, here are the arguments coming up. Yeah, it makes renting more affordable, particularly for low-income families, younger people, perhaps first-time buyers, and critically improves geographical mobility. A couple of people mentioned occupational immobility. I suggest it's geographical mobility, which in turn reduces structural unemployment. Again, with the exams, if you're using key terms, affordability, geographical immobility, structural unemployment, these are the key terms, part of the lexicon of your subject, which if you put them in the answer, you get that little sweet spot with the exam there. And critically, it does release money for people to spend on other things. You could make a strong link perhaps between spending less on rent and being able to afford more nutritious food, and that has consequences for child poverty, for malnutrition, for brain development, for health and productivity. And you make these chains of reasoning, these connections. And critical, of course, it allows people to save. So they might be able to afford to save perhaps as a mortgage deposit or just save for other items of spending. Evaluation, please. Over to you on this one. Can you give me 2 arguments against a system of rent controls? 30 seconds. Yeah, great points coming in from Sean about distortion of the free market. I love this argument from Noah here. Worsening quality in the rental market due to landlords profit maximising and not maintaining the properties. That hints, Noah, at really strong evaluative skills there. Joe says, takes away competitiveness in the market. Areas show real demand for living will be limited in the potential consumer base. Yeah, good point. Again, would rent controls hold back the growth of emerging towns and cities where employment is rising? Alex talks about less incentive to build new homes, so a decrease in the housing supply. What I love about that point is you're talking about incentives and then the consequence. There's always consequences. Great point, Alex. Thanks for that. And here are my 2 points. First of all, yes, I think rent controls, the experience over the years is that it does lead to a reduced supply of and quality of rental housing. So you'll get a fall in new construction, and critically, landlords typically will cut back on maintenance. So there might be more externalities from damp and from houses that are not really fit to live in. As students, you will find this out when you go to university. And then the law of unintended consequences kicks in that could cause government failure. So all the costs of implementation, of enforcement of these rent controls, very, very difficult, very complex to enforce. And also longer waiting times. People in a rent controlled house probably won't move when they probably should have moved. And as a result, there's fewer homes, people living there for longer. You need that flow of homes, people coming and going. The rental market might well dry up, and that is a form of government failure. Superb answers, absolutely brilliant. This team economics on fire. Let's try one more to finish with. And those of you who've been with us the whole session, hopefully you found it useful. Let's take one more. It has been suggested that the top rate of tax might go up from 45% to 50%. Obviously not by Kwasi Kwarteng, who lost his job on the basis of his proposal. First time ever a debate about about 45p led to a P45. 620,000 people were paying the top 45% income tax rate this year. So just over 500,000 paying top rate tax. Here's the question. Can you give me, please, some arguments, ideally 3, in favour of raising the top marginal rate of tax in the UK from 45% to 50%? What can the group come up with on this one? 30 seconds, over to you. Great points coming in. I quite like Paddy's point. I'll just hopefully put it on the screen. Paddy Corbett's point, which again shows a nice chain of reasoning. Increased tax revenue improves the capacity, love that word, for government spending on infrastructure and improvements in healthcare education, leading to a long-term rise in equality and productivity. And that point's worth emphasising because what you're doing there, Paddy's point, he is taking an argument, it generates more tax revenue, but then developing the point and saying, well, what are the consequences? Why does that matter? Talks about infrastructure, healthcare education, merit goods, etc., human capital, and critically, perhaps, a long-term rise in equality and productivity. But of course, it depends on 2 things. One, does it generate the tax revenue? Does revenue go up? And secondly, how is that tax revenue used? So good analysis leads to strong evaluation. So thank you for that point, Paddy. Lots of others. Hypothecation, Bri talks about hypothecation. Using money specifically from a top rate tax to fund something, early years education, childcare, subsidies, what have you. My key arguments would be, first of all, that it raises revenue and that can help pay for key public services such as education and health. By the way, you don't need the data, you just have to use the phrase such as to get the application. If you want to go more detail, such as early years education or social care within the NHS. That just adds a little extra granular detail, okay? It reduces post-tax income inequality. Quite a few of you were saying it cuts the Gini coefficient. Super point, but then link it. What does that mean? Well, my argument is it would increase demand because typically you're taking money away from people on a high income, redistributing it to people on the low income who have a higher propensity to spend. So aggregate demand probably would go up. And there's a wider issue about equity and fairness and social justice that if you believe in vertical equity, people with broader shoulders should pay more. If you have the ability to pay, perhaps you should be paying a higher percentage of your income and tax, although that is a value judgment. Well, we have one more opportunity for you to fire in amazing points. Can you give me, in 30 seconds, one or more counter arguments? What are the arguments against raising the marginal tax rate from 45%, 50%? 30 seconds. Over to you. Again, some fantastic answers. We are blessed with having some superb students today. It really is hugely encouraging as we go through our revision sessions. As we head towards the exams, loads of sessions coming up. It's almost like a community, Shoot You community of students helping each other with their points. Noah talks about earners finding ways of tax avoidance. Throws in the two words, the Laffer curve. I thought that would come up. Paddy again says it doesn't address inequality caused by indirect taxes. So raising income tax doesn't address the regressive nature of indirect taxes. That is strong evaluation. Lots of you talking about disincentives, which is a good word to use, disincentives to work, to invest, to take risks, and so on. So thank you for those. And Bertie talks about potential brain drain, which could have an effect on long and aggregate supply in the labour market. Really good points. As always, superb. Let's hear my 3 points just to cement your arguments. Indeed, you challenged the idea that revenues would go up. Tax revenues might fall, and therefore you could bring in the Laffer curve analysis. For that, it could prompt an increase in tax avoidance and also tax evasion. If you can visualize a Laffer curve, by the way, that's you're in a good place when it comes to revision. There's a broader issue on the macro side of competitiveness. So it might make the UK economy less attractive to high earners, talented people coming in from overseas. And there's a wider issue to do with growth. So if you reduce the incentives for the top earners to work, to invest, to innovate, there could be some consequences for long-run aggregate supply. By the way, just quickly before we move on, you could turn that question into a synoptic question. Assess the micro and macro effects of raising the top rate of income tax. So all you would need is one micro point, work incentives, for example, and one macro point, the impact on economic growth and investment. So well done, some superb answers for that. And huge thanks to everybody who's contributed in the live chat. It makes such a big difference. Just very quickly, the top 10% of income taxpayers in the UK, they actually contribute 60% of all the income tax revenues. So they're already contributing a huge amount of income tax because they earn more and they're taxed at a higher rate. Just a couple of slides to finish with, just to round off. Have a think about the diagrams you might want to include in any question on poverty and inequality. So again, this is maybe a chance after this session to go away, think, okay, what diagrams do I know? Do I need to revise? The Lorenz curve is a key one. And from that, you can show the Gini coefficient. Some of you have done the Kuznets curve, which shows a changing relationship between income per capita and inequality. And then obviously we've been through the analysis diagram for minimum wage. Make sure your notes are good on that. Can you draw rent control diagrams? Can you draw, particularly if you're AQA, maybe OCR as well, can you draw the monopsony labour market diagram, which shows why monopsonists might pay low wages to certain groups of workers? Examiners will always credit developed diagrams. Take your diagram one more stage further, change the elasticity, shift more than one curve. That's what they're looking for to get the top marks for analysis. And once you do that, you'll get higher marks for evaluation because the two go together. Just briefly, and finally, you might be asked, we've talked about the UK today, but you might be asked to examine, assess, discuss, evaluate causes of inequality in emerging economies, developing countries. We mentioned Angola, Mozambique, South Africa. So, and here the causes of income inequality or relative poverty are often very different. Big rural-urban differences, for example, very limited welfare systems, limited tax systems, monopoly rents flow into elites, and obviously the self-sustaining nature of absolute poverty, people who literally can't afford to save. So always, if you get a question on this, which is likely, it's going to come up at some point, try to apply to the context you're given. Think about the countries you're talking about. Think about which policies might be more relevant to a particular country over time. Right, okay. So we've got time for a few questions. Birdie says, could you comment on application for top marks and advice? Yes, well, my point about application, Birdie, is if you're writing a 25 mark essay, for example, EdXL, which I teach, we have to write 5 paragraphs. There should be some application in each paragraph. Only one bit of application needed, but some application. So it might be you've got an extract you can use, might be some data charts you've been given. So you must draw on those. But if you haven't, it could say, for example, using a country of your choice or using an industry of your choice. So you have to put in some application relevant to the question in each main paragraph. Frank says, when is the first exam? Well, I can tell you, Frank, it's the 18th of May, followed by that's paper one. The next one is the 22nd of May. And the third economics paper, which for some of you is the synoptic paper, is the 5th of June. So everything's been brought forward by about a week actually this year. They now have 2 economics papers before half term, summer term, and 1 after. So economics will be all over by the first week of June. So it's on the horizon for those of you who've started to revise. Just a chance, maybe, if there are a couple more questions, we'll put them up on the screen as they come through, and I'll do my best to answer them. Ishrat, do we absolutely need an introduction? Does it gain us marks? Would you recommend scrapping it? Well, Ishrat, depends on your exam board. If it's EdXL, for sure, you do not need an introduction. In any question, in any part of the exam, get straight on with the answer. I think AQA, maybe it's slightly different. I will give way to people who know more about AQA than I do. But often introductions are a waste of time, and you're under time pressure anyway. Far better to get straight into the question. Remenza, I saw that you do industry examples for macro. Do you also do country examples for macro? Yes, we do. And what you'll find in the next few weeks and months, we'll be doing some more country profiles of countries that I think are really interesting. So keep a lookout for those. And maybe time for one more question. Here we go. How do you revise for economics? That's a hard question. And there's another question to do quantitative skills live streams. How do you revise? I think for economics, the key is to have really good study notes. Add in your examples along the way, your application, practice your diagrams, and always be on the lookout for 1 or 2 little extra bits of detail, which hopefully this session's giving you on poverty and inequality. And really the key for revision is active revision. So writing essay plans, practice time questions, do your flashcards, practice drawing diagrams. The secret is to keep practicing so you can do more and more accurately in less time, so you don't run up against the time constraints in the paper. I also suggest, by the way, you don't revise alone. You find groups, small groups. This community is a good one, but find people at school or college who you can revise with and support each other. It's always better if you revise in small groups. Obviously, there's a moment where you have to revise individually, but small groups can help each other in areas of relative strength and weakness. Okay, what do we think? So Hadia says, what do you think our EdXL paper 3 will be on? Well, it's a synoptic paper, and they can ask anything they want. There's no advance notice this year, but critically, you'll be able to find out from paper 1 and paper 2 what they've asked before half term. And with paper 3, there's no extra revision. There's no fresh content. You just revise existing content with a slightly different style of question. Lovely. Well done, everybody. Hopefully you found this session useful. We're doing more sessions. There's actually a revision session tonight, live stream at 6:30. I'm doing one on exchange rates tomorrow, really key macro topic, and then competitiveness. And what you'll find is we're going to be doing loads of revision sessions as we go in February, March, April. Keep a lookout too for our live events. I am so looking forward to doing all the events in London, for example, the week before, last week of March. And we'll be heading around the country, a fantastic team. It's a great day. We cover a lot. You get a fantastic booklet. You get access to the online course. It really is a terrific course, and we are super excited to be going to the Northeast, for example, London, Leeds, Manchester, all across the UK. It'd be great to meet you, so please do sign up. As always, we take nothing for granted here. Huge thanks to the community that posted their answers in the chat window today. Hope you found it useful. If you did, please press like and subscribe so you get notifications of when the next sessions are. Stay happy, stay positive, stay healthy, and see you soon.